So Keir Starmer is expected to announce plans for a digital ID scheme which will be compulsory in order to work in the UK. The government says it will take aspects of similar initiatives in other countries, including Australia, where digital ID is used to access private services, Estonia, where it's used to access children's records, and Denmark, where students can store information about their education. Also India, where it's claimed a similar system has saved billions of dollars in fraud. Civil liberty groups and opposition parties have raised concerns about privacy and say the measure won't stop people coming into Britain illegally. Well, speaking on the Today programme earlier on Radio 4, the Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy clarified how the system would work.
From the end of this Parliament, every person in the UK will have a digital ID. And if you want to work in the UK, you'll be required to show proof of that through your digital ID. We think that's better for employers because at the moment it's far easier to fake papers. We think it's easier for them to be able to check that and know that what they're looking at is correct. And of course, there are huge fines. You can even face a jail sentence if you employ someone illegally here in the UK. So we think it offers protection for them, and it also enables us to make sure that anyone who comes to this country who is working is doing so legally.
I want to get clarity, if I can, about whether this is compulsory. Now, you've just said something important. Every person in the UK will have a digital ID. Are you saying, whether you like it or not, you will have an identity that the government has for you on a database, but you will have a choice as to whether you actually have that on your mobile phone?
Yes, I think that's broadly right. So every single person will have a digital ID and they'll have to have a digital ID, but they won't be required to use it on a daily basis. This is not like an ID card where you would be asked to show it as you're moving around. Many of the listeners will have been to other countries where you're required to carry an ID card at all times. That's not what we're proposing. It's not a card, it's a digital ID.
But someone
and
could
you won't
turn
be
up at your
required to have it on
factory
your
or your
phone
office.
or carry it around.
Forgive me, but someone could turn up at a factory or an office and say, prove that you have a right to work here. Prove, in other words, that you have a digital ID. That would be effectively compulsory for all workers.
Well, at the moment, somebody could turn up at a factory or a workplace and ask for checks to make sure that everybody who was there had the right to work in the UK. You wouldn't be required to have that with you at the time, but you would be required to have a digital ID and be able to produce that.
That's why I'm puzzled, you see. There are lots of arguments for digital ID, which are nothing to do with migration. For convenience, lots of countries like Estonia, India, all sorts of countries introduce them, save people time. They save people carrying papers around with them or digging around. But that's not the government's argument. The government's argument's migration. You can be asked to show your papers now in a factory or in a workplace or to go and find them. So what on earth difference is this going to make?
Well, first of all, it's a much more rigid system. Or at the moment, for example, you show you give your national insurance number to prove that you have the right to work in the UK. That's not linked to any kind of photo ID or anything else. So it's far easier to pass off somebody else's national insurance number as your own. We've seen a rise in the amount of identity theft and fraud, people losing documents only then to find that somebody else has taken over their identity. And, I have many constituents who get in touch nowadays in a way that I didn't 14 years ago when I was first elected, saying that somebody has got insurance to drive using their identity. Our argument is illegal migration. That is the thing that we're most concerned about. But we do also think this is going to have major benefits.
Lisa Nandy there being quizzed by Nick Robinson on the Today programme this morning. We are going to talk to our political correspondent to get a little bit more clarity about the nature of this digital scheme. But first, let's talk to Kieran Pedley, who's Director of Politics at the market research company Ipsos. Because, Kieran, you've been doing some research, you've been polling about this to find out how much public support there is. Firstly, let's start with the breadth of the research that you've done, because it was a relatively small research group. Just bring us up to date with how many people you were asking.
Good morning. So we've done a nationally representative poll of 1,100 Brits online, which is a pretty standard sample size for a poll of this kind. And we asked attitudes around ID cards, both sort of hard copies and digital, and also some of the reasons for and against support for them.
And thank you for clarifying that, because it's always important just to get the numbers out there. So in terms of a digital scheme, what kind of feelings were people sharing with you?
So I think that if we were going to summarise the research in a sentence, what we see is that there is broad support for the principle of ID cards. But then when you put the arguments for and against them to the public and ask about digital ID specifically, the picture is more nuanced. So to put numbers to that specifically, 38% of the public say they support the principle of digital ID, 32% oppose. So more in support than oppose, but less than a majority, less than half in support. And the reasons for support tend to be around convenience and the ease of being able to prove your identity. Also, there is some specific feedback that people think this could help combat illegal immigration, but there are concerns about data security and what would be on those cards too. So it's one of those cases where there's more in support than opposed, but the devil really is in the detail.
And it's that kind of detail that we don't have at the moment, which I guess makes your job very difficult. But when you then press people, what kind of questions were you asking them? Were you talking about, say, DNA information, or were you talking about other types of information that potentially could be on this digital ID scheme?
Well, I think when you think about digital ID, our polling at Ipsos shows there are two broad concerns that the public have that the government will have to address. One of them is about the government itself. Trust in government is pretty low at the moment. And so there, just over half of the public are concerned about the government's ability to roll out a scheme of this nature securely. On the information that would be contained on cards specifically, the public are pretty relaxed. I think it's fair to say, to have their photograph, their date of birth, perhaps information about their next of kin or their national insurance number. This is information people are reasonably relaxed about. But if this card was to include information such as your DNA, fingerprints, and perhaps sensitive information around your social security history or maybe your religious background, this is what concerns people. So again, we can give the headline numbers that say more are in support for this principle than oppose, and that is where the public are at today. There is sympathy with some of the arguments for this. But again, what matters is what information is going to be on this card and how is it going to be rolled out. Yeah, the devil in the detail as always. Kieran Pedley from Ipsos, thank you very much. And it's that detail that we are trying to work out, we are trying to analyse. And we've been hearing earlier on from Lisa Nandy. She was talking to Nick Robinson, my colleague on the Today programme on Radio 4. Let's cross over to our political correspondent, Harry Farley, who joins us from Westminster. And Harry, it's that detail that we're kind of lacking in at the moment. Let's just start with whether this is going to be mandatory, because there was a question mark over that.
There was a question mark over that. So this will be compulsory in order to work in the UK, and that's the distinction that the government is making. So in order to get a job in the UK, you will have to have this digital ID card. So if, for example, if you're a pensioner, for example, or not working for other reasons, you will not have to have one. So it's not compulsory for absolutely everyone. And the government, that's one of the ways that the government is hoping to mitigate some of those concerns that, for example, the Liberal Democrats have expressed around elderly people maybe not having a smartphone, struggling with access to the internet and so on, being excluded from a universal compulsory system. This is compulsory in order to work in the UK. But so everyone, whether you're a UK citizen or not, in order to work, will have to have one. In terms of some other details that we do know, it will be held on people's smartphones, much like contactless mobile payments, for example, where you have having a boarding pass when you board a flight. You'll have to have one in order to work by the end of this decade. The government wants to have this scheme up and running by the next election. You won't have to carry it with you at all times. You won't be asked to produce it in the street, for example, but you will just need it for those right to work tests. And in terms of those other details, the government admit that they're going to consult on this. There will be a 3-month consultation announced, and then there will be legislation that has to go through Parliament. This will require a new law to bring this out. So we're not talking about this happening immediately. This will happen, consultation for the next few months and then likely legislation next year.
Yeah, they've got an awful lot to work out in terms of the detail, given that they want to implement this before the end of this political term, parliamentary term. But just in terms of the aspect of whether it's compulsory or not, I wonder, do you know, Harry, do we even know yet whether this is something that will be generated automatically, say like a national insurance number is, but as we approach our 16th birthday, many years ago, arguably for me. But when you get to that point, you automatically have a national insurance number generated. Is that where we are going with this? But then you don't have to have it on your phone, or is it something that you opt into, so you have to apply for it?
It's a very good question, and to be honest, those kind of details will come in the consultation and afterwards when we get the details of that legislation. One of the other things the government's going to consult on is exactly how much information is going to be on these cards. You know, it was really interesting hearing about the polling there, about the levels of public support for the principle of some kind of digital ID, but then concerns around, perhaps having some fingerprint data, some DNA data on there as well, and whether that reduces the public support. It's a really interesting question. Speaking to people in government last night, saying that is one of the things they're going to be consulting on. They're going to be asking the public and experts for their views on that. And that will also have a bearing on how much this will cost, for example, because obviously the more information attached to these IDs, the more it will cost. One of the things that a government advisor said to me last night is, he said, they are not at the moment thinking about linking this to medical records. So that's quite important to remember. They're not thinking of doing that at the moment. And he also makes the case that he thinks that in the last 20 years or so since we last had this debate, the government's view is that the public have shifted and that they are more used to having types of ID on smartphones, on digital devices. They're more open to that idea. And the government's argument is that, listen, this will have a fraction of the information that, say, a supermarket loyalty card has on it, and even smaller fraction than social media companies have about people. So their argument is that they think the public will support this, that attitudes to forms of identification have changed, and that they hope that this will have the public support. It's worth saying, though, it has united the other parties in opposition to this. The Conservatives and Reform say this won't help to clamp down on illegal working. That's one of the justifications for the argument. And the Liberal Democrats and others expressing concerns about civil liberties, and particularly those people who might be excluded, for example, who don't have a smartphone.
Harry, as always, thank you very much for clarifying some of those aspects of what we know, a lot that we don't know. But Harry Farley, as always, many thanks. And we are expecting Sir Keir Starmer to talk through those, to make that formal announcement a little bit later on today.